Hi, I'm Joe Harroz, president of the University of Oklahoma. I want to welcome you to our Conversations with the President. This platform gives me the chance to talk to some of the great people who make OU so special. Make sure you're subscribed to Conversations with the President, and you'll be the first to know when new episodes are released. Let's get started. All right, first things first, I want to thank OU women's basketball head coach Jenny Baranchek, who joined us for the last episode and did a remarkable job. If you've not done so, please go back and listen to that episode. She is absolutely terrific. And while you're doing that, subscribe to Conversations with the President so you can get every new episode when it's released. Get it before your neighbor so that when they're talking about it, you already have it. You don't want to be behind that conversation. Today's episode is absolutely exciting. It is the first time that we've had somebody join us via Zoom, join us remotely. We're bringing in Randall Stephenson, who rose to the position of CEO of AT&T, and we thought what better than to challenge our IT department by doing one via Zoom for him. We're excited about it and can't wait for you to listen to this coming episode. All right, now it is absolutely my favorite time of the year. It's graduation time. For the students, they're in dead week right now, heading towards finals, so it's not quite so much fun for them. But they're heading towards graduation. It's a week from this Friday. And each year, we try and find a speaker that will truly inspire our students. This year is especially exciting for us, and it brings us to our guest on this episode of Conversations with the President. We didn't just look for someone who was a global leader and someone who had accomplished at scale and had great character. That's always the objective. But this year we thought it'd be wonderful to find one of our own, someone that was an OU alum and who's still deeply a part of the University of Oklahoma, and that brought us to our friend Randall Stephenson. Randall Stephenson is former chair and CEO of AT&T. He is our commencement speaker. You'll hear more, but he had a 40-year career. It was Southwestern Bell, turned in ultimately into AT&T. He is so plugged into the University of Oklahoma and into much broader communities. I want to say thank you and welcome Randall Stephenson for joining us. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. So I've had the absolute pleasure of getting to know you, and I know your story, so I'm dying to tell it. But I think people tuned in because they wanted to hear from you. So could you tell us about, you're truly Sooner born and Sooner bred. Tell us about your upbringing.
Joe, my upbringing probably looks like about 80% of the people that are in the University of Oklahoma graduating this year. I grew up in the state. In fact, I grew up 8 miles north of campus in Moore, Oklahoma. In fact, Toby Keith and I graduated at the same school. Moore, Oklahoma, went to high school there. Toby likes to brag that only his name is on the outside of the water tower in Moore. I tell Toby mine is on the inside of the water tower. Mom always told me it's what inside that counts. So anyway, I grew up in that community and grew up in a classic middle-class family and just grew up loving Sooner football, loving all things Oklahoma.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. Toby does take great pride in that. I saw him at the softball game on this past weekend and mentioned you were coming here, and he took great pride in echoing a very similar story with a slightly different spin.
I'm sure.
Right. So you often talk about, one of the things that we hope for our students, you've seen our strategic plan, and, one of the 5 pillars is to prepare students for a life of success and meaning and impact. As you went through your childhood and more, and then ultimately coming to get your master's at OU, how do you feel OU influenced you?
Wow, OU was huge in terms of teaching me the things that I needed to succeed, not just in my job and in career, but in life. And I reflect a lot on my time at Oklahoma, particularly in graduate school. In graduate school, I tell people that I didn't learn the subject matter. I did. What I really learned more than anything was how to think, how to reason, how to respond to challenge, how to respond to aggressive challenge in a classroom, doing case studies and so forth. I had professors, one I always reference is Dr. Fran Ayers, who I just loved, but she had an approach when you were learning dry, sterile, boring things like tax law or accounting theory and those types of things, to always push you to go back and understand what were the people who put these rules in place trying to accomplish? What was their motivation? That's one of those things that, regardless of what you're doing in life, if you come at a problem where you're trying to get to a solution with a counterparty, always having an appreciation for what are they trying to accomplish moves you quicker to solution, moves you quicker to success than anything else. And so I just always look back at these, what I will call bedrock learnings, bedrock principles, how to think, how to reason, that have helped me more than anything else as I went into the world of business.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I always enjoy our conversations because we're so similar. We're basically twins in the sense that I'll tell a story about meeting with the university president, and then you'll tell me a story about meeting with a U.S. president. Those are vastly different things. I'll talk about meeting this president, and you'll say, "Yeah, when I was talking with President Obama or President Trump." Those are engaging stories. So, are you telling me that as the quintessential Oklahoman, that the tools that you learned at OU and that you gained by growing up in Moore, Oklahoma, have translated well into the global stage?
That not only translated well, they have proven to be universal tools. And that when I look around me, my peers who are other CEOs or even leaders in our government, they're the same tools that when I look at the ones whom I admire, they're the same tools that they actually deploy in how they interact with people and how they try to affect change. So yeah, they not only were critical in terms of developing me, but I also see them as critical in some of the greatest leaders that I've interacted with.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. So in this role as OU president, whenever I'm with student leadership groups, one of the questions I always get asked, and it goes to your point about making sure you know what the counterparty to a negotiation wants to accomplish. The question that I almost always get from student leaders, I'd love to pose to you, and that question is, what advice would you give to someone who is starting off their college career? And in fact, they usually sharpen it to say, what advice would you give to yourself if you could advise yourself when you were a freshman coming into OU? What advice would you have given yourself?
Don't worry about your next job or your next opportunity. Whatever position, role, business you step into it in that moment with nothing but a focused, all-in, concerted effort to do that task or that role as best as you possibly can. That's one of the things I always loved about recruiting out of the University of Oklahoma. I ran AT&T. You brought students 99 times out of 100. That's the kind of person you got. And what I found is you come in and you master a task, you master a role, you fundamentally change how that role or responsibility is done. You don't stay in that role very long. You get asked to do other difficult things. And I'll never forget one time I had gone through my career early on and I'd step into a role and I'd be asked to clean it up. You'd clean it up. And as soon as you got it cleaned up and running great, they'd throw you into another mess. And I'll never forget going to who was the CFO of Southwestern Bell at the time, expressing my frustration. Every time I fix one of your messes, you turn around and throw me into another one. And he just paused and he looked at me and he said, "You're finally beginning to understand your value to this organization." That is exactly what every individual ought to come into their role thinking and doing. Fix it, make it better, move on to the next thing. I've always told people, if you find yourself in a job that you've been in for 10, 15 years, you ought to ask why. There's probably a reason. And if you're not being asked to go do other challenging, difficult things, then there's probably an indication that you haven't really dealt with in a great way what you have before you at the moment.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely wise. So oftentimes, students will look at at someone like you and say, well, he must have had some huge advantage that allowed him to make it to the become CEO of AT&T. I mean, AT&T is enormous, right? It's a Fortune, inside the Fortune 15, probably around Fortune 10 in terms of size of companies, probably 250,000 employees worldwide. I mean, it is just an absolute giant. It can't be that a kid from Moore, Oklahoma makes it to the CEO position at AT&T. How'd you get, I love the story of how you got your first job, and tell us how you worked your way up.
I got my first job at Southwestern Bell. I like to say I got it the fashion way. My brother got me on. My brother's an installer for AT&T in Norman, Oklahoma, still to this day. And I was my wife, Lanice, as a school, and I remember asking her if she would marry me, and she said, "Yeah, I'd love to marry you. But you better get a job." I talked to my brother. I got on at Southwestern Bell working in the data center in the tape room, and had the most menial, uh, boring job you could ever imagine. I hung 9-inch tapes, and most of your students will not even know what a 9-inch tape is. Storage tapes on tape drives to run billing jobs, and it was absolutely awful. There's a classic case. I went into that job and I thought there's got to be a more efficient way of doing this. And so I took that role and changed it. They put me on something else. And over time, I was able to do things like uh, run our operations in Mexico, move our family. Came back in the middle of a bunch of deal making we were doing at the time, rolling up other telephone companies. I got to be engaged in running some of those processes. Soon I was CFO, then CO. My wife shakes her head. She doesn't know how it happened either. She looks at me and says, "How could this have possibly happened with you?" But
it's those votes of
we were
confidence that
fortunate.
really
We were
help.
put in right opportunities at the right time, and had a great experience.
Yeah, it really is pretty amazing to try and take a 40-year career and summarize it from, entry-level job that your brother, who is a line worker, gets you all the way to becoming CEO. I mean, it's truly, sort of the great Oklahoma and great American story of what can happen.
You called it the American story, and as far fetched as what you just articulated is or seems, it's not that uncommon in this country for an individual with no pedigree or no significant background in these areas to be given the opportunity to pursue an education at a reasonable cost, and with that education be given opportunities to do some of the things you and I have been able to do over the years. And so as far as it sounds, it's not it's not that unheard of, and it's not that unusual in this country. I think that's what makes this country such a unique and beautiful place.
No, I think it's fascinating. That is, it's at the cornerstone of a belief I have, and I'd love to get your take on it. That the link that allows for that kind of story to be possible, that the accelerant that must be there, is high quality, affordable higher education, available to anyone that has the talent and the drive, regardless of economic circumstance. Is that a fair statement?
It's not only fair, it just happens to be accurate and true. And look, I was fortunate. I grew up in Oklahoma at a time when, from a public policy standpoint, we appreciated the importance of higher education, and we invested taxpayer dollars in higher education. And unfortunately, as budgets get tight, we seem to have pulled back on that. But I have to say, were it not for the ability to get an education when I was in school for $15 a credit hour. I mean, I laugh when I think about that. But $15 a credit hour to go to school, I was able to get a full, high quality education. I graduated without a single nickel of debt. And that gave me the opportunity to pursue the things that you and I have been talking about. And I really regret that we as a society have not appreciated the significance of what an investment in the education of our young people produces, and how it actually, the returns that it creates for a state and the taxpayer. But yeah, I very much agree with your sentiment that higher education, when done right and delivered properly, like I think we do at the University of Oklahoma, the return on investment to a society.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I think in many ways that the American dream is only possible as long as we provide that. And not just, it's interesting. I started school a few years behind you. My tuition had jumped all the way to $35 an hour, and yet somehow I was able to handle that. But I think in so many ways that without that, the American dream becomes less attainable. And so that's certainly core to how we think here. All right, so you were rising
maybe
the
it's
ranks.
attainable to fewer people is probably the better way as the way I think about it. And the beauty of low cost education is it makes it available to all people in society, not just a select few.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. And one of the things I'm most proud of here is that right now, at a time when we're growing in record ways, unlike many private institutions, over a quarter of our students are the first in the history of their family to go past high school, and that's what my dad did for our family, and it changed us. So there's a beauty and an importance that extends beyond the individual family to our collective selves as a state and a nation. I could go off on that for a while. I know you could too. All right, let's circle back. So you're the big fancy former CEO of AT&T, and during that
defines me, fancy. Yes,
right. That's exactly right. I've seen you on a ranch, and you look more comfortable there than anywhere. As you think about the challenges that you faced on your way to becoming CEO, and while CEO of this global business superpower. While you were there, what were the biggest challenges that you faced?
Oh my, when you're running a company, when I retired, the company was $180 billion in revenues. And we were in, at that time, I think 190 countries around the world. And we had the largest full-time labor union in the United States. We were investing more capital than any other company in the United States for like the tenure of my years as CEO. And so you're faced with constant, really big challenges as you think about what you were trying to accomplish as a company. Invariably, unfortunately, your success or failure would run through Washington, D.C., and public policy, and even litigation and regulation. And so you ended up spending a lot of time in the world of public policy and rulemaking, and you're thrown before the Senate to testify why you were trying to do a certain thing, and you'd have senators challenging you and trying to embarrass you. You would have interactions, as you articulated earlier, with presidents trying to help them formulate policy around taxes and what would stimulate investment and create, incentives to invest in broadband, which was in everybody's best interest. And so it was those issues around public policy that created the greatest challenges. I've always said that if we could just get a set of rules that were defined, whether they were good or bad for a particular company, they just are what they are, define them, leave them alone for 5 years, watch what U.S. business will do. U.S. business will invest under those rules. They will hire under those rules. They'll provide healthcare under those rules. They'll do all the things that make this country great. But unfortunately, the rules, particularly in this day and age, move not every year. They move every month. And so when you're running a big company trying to make multi-billion-dollar investments that have paybacks over multiple years, man, when you have a structure like that, it makes it really, really hard. So that's where I spent a disproportionate, unfortunately, amount of my time.
Yeah, it's interesting and probably completely uninteresting to our audience right now. But as I look at this, it makes me think about the U.S. Supreme Court case they've just picked up around the Chevron doctrine, which might change the pace at which administrative agencies can change the rules. And I hadn't thought about it from the business angle. And to me, that's a fascinating perspective.
Oh boy, the old Chevron doctrine. And to your point, people will start falling asleep if we get into it. But that is a court ruling, a precedent that gives the administrative element, the bureaucracy, a lot of power in how the rules are set, and that's what allows the rules to change from month to month, literally.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And the U.S. Supreme Court has just taken this up for those that don't follow administrative law in the U.S. Supreme Court every day. It'll be before the court in the October term and then out in a year from this June. All right, so it's interesting. In addition to being CEO of AT&T, there is a group that is known as the Business Roundtable. And the Business Roundtable is the top, I think, 200 businesses in the United States. They get together and try and influence and discuss U.S. policy from the perspective of businesses. They represent 1 in 4 people employed in the United States, and you were chair of that organization, of the Business Roundtable. And so you had a front row seat on behalf of not just AT&T, but all of U.S. business at that scale into the White House, into Congress. In that role, we know you've spoken to presidents and major world leaders, but as you look at that and you reflect back on your time, what do you think is, and it may dovetail with what you just said, but it might be different, and if it is, I'd love to hear. What do you think is the most important thing that could be done from the business perspective to enhance and drive U.S. global competitiveness?
It's interesting. When I was asked to serve as chairman of the Business Roundtable, and as you said, it's the CEOs of the 200 largest companies in the United States that make up the Business Roundtable. I spoke to my board about it because you go into a position like that, you're going to be front and center, and you're going to be, you have to represent not just AT&T, but the entire business community and what is good for quote unquote business, which I happen to believe business to be a very noble endeavor. I happen to believe business done right and done ethically. There is nothing that creates more prosperity, more employment, more jobs, more well-being than business done well. So when I stepped into this, I spoke to my board that I felt like this is something I should do, not just for AT&T, but I just felt like it was a civic responsibility. And so when I stepped into it asking those questions. And I've tried to coalesce the CEOs around what are those things that really would matter in terms of propagating the environment that I just articulated to you. Steps up hiring, steps up investment, steps up productivity, steps up wage growth, and those kind of things. And we, the CEOs, 400 of us, landed on a very select number of priorities. And it was 4 priorities. I'm not even sure I could recall them all. I'm quite confident I could. But obviously, one was tax reform. And that one was not big because we want to pay less taxes. That was not the point. You asked, what is the thing we could do that would have most impact on elements I just discussed? At that time, the United States taxed corporations higher than any other developed country in the world. And we live in a world where capital is fungible. If I can get a better return in Japan as an investor, I'll invest there. If I can get a better return at that time in China, I'll invest there, Mexico, Latin America. And so we spent a lot of time talking about we've got to get the structure right where investors say we want to invest in the United States of America. And so we initiated an effort on tax reform. And I had many opportunities to have direct personal conversations with, at that time, President Obama. And we unfortunately did not move the needle under the Obama administration. I must say I had a good relationship with the president. When President Trump was elected, tax reform was initiated and actually got done. I know there's a lot of people who would debate this, but I would suggest that tax reform, that tax policy, drove unprecedented levels of investment for the next 3 to 4 years. They drove the first time in 20 years enhanced productivity in corporate America. Why is that important? It's important because mathematically you cannot have wage growth for the average American without productivity growth. And we finally began to experience 3 and 4% productivity growth and wage growth at all scales, at all levels of the employment base began to grow. And so it just is an indication of if business gets their mindset correct and tries to position it in terms of what's best for America and the American worker, you can get things done and you can influence public policy. And that's what we tried to do while I was in the Business Roundtable.
Yeah, it's exciting, and it matters fundamentally. Um, Maybe I know we're getting close to the end of our time. There's so many questions I want to ask you. Maybe just one more quick question before we get to the final ones they've actually given me to ask you. As you look at it now, 3 years out of the position, looking at sort of this global question in a world now where we have the current relationship with China and Russia's war in the Ukraine. When you think about the greatest threats to U.S. global competitiveness in the last 3 years since you've been out of that chair, what has changed? Are there any new threats that you think are new and really do put at risk the U.S. position as global superpower?
When I stepped down 3 years ago, I viewed at that time the greatest competitive threat facing the United States was the reality that all of these silicon chips that are in every facet of our society, they are in the microphone that you're speaking into right now, Joe. They're in the PC that I'm working on. They're in these smartphones that we all use. They're in your car. They are in your refrigerator. They are in every element of our lives. Our modern society runs on silicon chips. These silicon chips are almost exclusively manufactured in either Taiwan, a large amount of them in China. And as you think about threats to our competitiveness, if there were ever a moment of hostilities, what would be the biggest threat to me? That is a massive threat. It's a radical threat. Our Congress has tried to do some things about this over the last year. They've ended up putting a lot of junk into bills that are designed to try to get fabrication of silicon in the United States. But I can think of nothing more important than figuring out how we relieve ourselves from the dependence of silicon on the Far East and get that onto the shores of the United States of America. And so to me, that is probably one of the greatest threats facing us today.
It's fascinating. So as you, in listening to your thoughts, it is you look at silicone being essentially the oil of 20 years ago or 10 years ago in terms of the ability. It's not just an economic issue; it's a national security and national standing issue.
It is absolutely a national security issue, and it's you just made the best comparison. I mean, energy security is critical. Food security is critical to our security as a country and our independence as a country. Silicon manufacturing is an element that is consistent with each of those. Our modern way of life, how people work, how people commute, how people entertain, how people are receive health care is all dependent upon this technology. And I would really love to see a greater concerted effort for addressing this.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. Putting this in the role of higher education and even more personally in the role of students that are coming in. We talk a lot about it having been, moved to a knowledge-based society. And as someone that knows far more than I do on this, we're now in this digital economy. We've spent the last 6 months with public availability to generative AI. And so the pace of change is in no way linear. It's geometric in a lot of ways. If you were, talking to someone about advice for critical career tools while they're in college that might not have been something that you would have recommended 5-10 years ago, what would those tools be that you think a college student of today would need to be successful in this new economy?
The tools, notably the ability to think and to reason. Let's always start there. If you don't have a basic grounding in thinking and reasoning and logic, you're going to struggle. I don't care what you pursue. Now, as you think about technical tools, what are the technical tools that are critical over the next 5 years that we probably weren't even talking about when I was in school? Blockchain. I mean, people who have a working and adept knowledge in blockchain and the ability to use blockchain tools are going to be high demand for a long, long time. The same with, as you just articulated, generative AI, artificial intelligence, and people that are getting grounded and well situated and understanding how to use those tools, how to develop applications on top of both blockchain and AI. By the way, I think those two come together in a very short period of time, and they become really powerful tools together. But people that can actually learn to develop on top of those, just like, when I came out of school, people who could develop on top of HTML, and develop applications on top of the internet. That's where all the wealth and the knowledge and the great products were created. People who can do that same kind of development on top of blockchain and generative AI are going to be the ones who really excel over the next 10 years. And so I hope our students are looking way as they begin to position themselves for career moves or thinking about how they can move into those areas.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So just to make sure I'm hearing you correctly, and I know you'll correct me if I'm wrong. So if you think about the skills that that someone needs to be successful in the world of today and tomorrow, it sounds like it would be an interesting combination of having the technical skills to be able to understand and compete and thrive in a digital economy, the ones you just described. But it also involves maybe an understanding of the classics and engaging in maybe the arts and understanding the humanities and the ability to engage in critical thinking skills that are those equally important?
Oh my! Look, technical schools are a path for students, and I think they're a path for a lot of students. And you can go to technical schools and get the technical skills you need to excel in some of these areas. But the people with the breadth and the depth of thought, the depth and the breadth of reasoning and logic, those come through the disciplines that you just articulated: the humanities, the arts, the letters, philosophy. I think those are the capabilities that if we're not rounding our students with those type of capabilities, then we're just a vocational or a technical school, which is important. But I think we aspire to be much more than that for our young people.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And those will be the leaders and the wealth generators and the content creators, right? I mean, those are...
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's such an important mind, especially at a time when unemployment is so low and has been for the last several years, and it's easy to get a job that appears to be paying well based upon just technical skills. To me, that's a concern that I have because I do think that as economic cycles go and as we look forward, that larger basket, more well-rounded student will be the ones that actually rise to, the positions of CFO, CEO, and the like that you've been a part of. I could talk to you forever, Randall. And
Likewise, Joe.
As you can tell, I've sort of diverged from let's talk about graduation and the excitement around that to sort of summoning my inner Fareed Zakaria, only because I love the way you think and the experiences you bring and the perspective that you offer. All right, so as we are now, I will see you next, if all goes well, a week from this Friday as our commencement speaker. I'm certain you will pack the house. It'll be like a game, or probably our first game in the SEC against Alabama. So 84,000, an extra 100,000 outside. For those that can't gain access, can you give us a 30-second trailer of the speech that you're going to deliver?
You know what? We've covered a lot of that waterfront here. Seriously, we will talk a little bit about growing up and what were the things that really were important and critical to me. We will also speak about the dangers of technology and some of the downsides. I'll call it the dark side of technology. I hope our young people, as they step into the world of commerce, will be heightened and made aware of, and perhaps give them some things to think about as they move down that path. And then we'll also talk a lot, Joe, about some of the ills of our society and some things that I think this generation is uniquely equipped to address. And I'm talking Gen Z. We're now talking to Gen Z, and they have some qualities that we haven't seen in recent generations that I think are going to be critical to helping this country, and I maybe even more broadly, the globe survive and thrive. And so we'll be talking about those qualities are, and I hope this generation, when they step out, will take full advantage of these unique skill sets that they have and these unique temperaments that they have. I know a lot of people my age in the workforce complain about Gen Z. I think Gen Z is our greatest hope. We have not had a generation with the what I will call the unique perspective that this one has, which gives me so much optimism for where we are going as a country.
Yeah, it's that could be a show in and of itself. And I think you've just given it its title, Gen Z, The Great Hope. Sort of has a Star Wars feel to it. I like it a lot. I almost skipped over an area that is so important. I reached out to you, which you will not recall. I think it was the day that you stepped down as CEO of AT&T. And again, you may not recall this at all, but I asked you what you were going to do next besides take a deep breath for the first time in 40 years. What have you been doing for the last 3 years for our listeners, and why?
I retained what I'll call some business responsibilities. I sit on the board of this little retailer out of Arkansas. You heard of them, Walmart.
It's a mom and pop, yeah.
Little mom and pop shop. And I've really enjoyed that. The Walton family I've gotten to know quite well. It's an amazing company as it relates to technology and some of the challenges that they are facing. So I've stayed engaged there. I also have remained engaged with the PGA Tour, and they've had some issues. An alternative competitor coming in, specifically funded by the Saudis, and so there have been a lot of interesting challenges with that. And I love the game of golf, and I know a lot of the players, and that's been fun. But then Lanice and I have engaged a lot with the University of Oklahoma, and I just give you credit, and Stacy Reeder at the College of Education, on trying to address some of the learning shortfalls that in our secondary education system in the state of Oklahoma that are producing some alarming results. And I have a passion, Lisa and I have a passion to looking at what I'll call the adolescents, 8th and 9th grade. This is an area where when kids struggle, if we don't get them remediation and help, particularly in the area of math, you can almost put a statistical predictor on how many will not graduate high school. You can put a statistical predictor on that in terms of how many will end up incarcerated. And you can put a statistical predictor on that in terms of how many will be reincarcerated in 5 years. And we have a situation which is a downward spiral of not addressing this. And so Lanice and I have been doing some work with Stacy and her team at the Oklahoma College of Education to try to create some solutions for how we step in and remediate this and see if there are things here that can be scaled that can change the trajectory of this for our state in Oklahoma. So that's taking a lot of time. We're doing a lot of other civic engagement. We have 5 kids, and got a number, so keep me busy. But these are the areas that we're focusing on.
Well, it's an absolute joy to work with you and Lanice. It is we call it colloquially the high dosage tutoring, and I love that it's right out of both of y'all's playbook. It's not just where can we give, but how can we contribute to research that can help some individuals right now, and also potentially scale across the state or even more broadly across the nation or even globally. It is emblematic of who both of you are. Truly grateful for it. And thank you for taking the time. This was supposed to be 15, 20 minutes. I think it's gone 40. I could make it another 3 hours. You would probably drop off quickly.
It's always fun visiting with you, Joe. Thanks for all you do for the university.
No, it's a joy. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you on Friday.
Thanks a lot.
All right, I want to thank again our guest for the show, Randall Stephenson, for joining us. As you can tell, he's a remarkable talent, combining absolutely down-to-earth qualities with an encyclopedic knowledge and remarkable insights. Thrilled to have him helping OU in so many ways and much more broadly. We also appreciate him for serving as our commencement speaker for this year. This is such a great time. It's a whirlwind this time of year as we head towards graduation in less than 9 days, but it is a true culmination of the students' hard work, and it's an honor to recognize their achievements. It's one of the great times to be a university president. I know we're all looking forward to celebrating the class of 2023. Thank you for listening to today's show, and I look forward to our next conversation with the president. Thank you.